Let's have a comparison now of the cars that we expect to be at the front of the field for the opening Grand Prix of the year. And we can have a little bit of a comparison, I believe, between the two of the front-running cars. So this is heading down into turn 10. We've got the Red Bull and the Ferrari.
Yeah, you can really see just that some of the overall shape of the car. If you're a very much, this is your first time watching Formula 1, they probably look very similar to you. But when you start looking at the overall shapes of the car, yeah, the side pods are slightly different shape. The wings are really quite a different shape. Look how much flatter the wings of the RB19 are to the SF-23, but also the shape of them is quite different. It's the shape you're looking at more than the angle in some ways, because that tells you a little bit more about what the teams are doing. But you're also seeing that fundamental difference in approach between Ferrari and Red Bull that we saw last year. The front suspension of the Red Bull is a pull rod front suspension, so you can see that diagonal element going down to the base. That's the bit that makes the springs and dampers work as the wheels go up and down. And then you can see on the Ferrari, the diagonal element is going upwards. There's a sort of an upwards triangle, and that is the springs and dampers are mounted higher in the chassis. Now, the advantage for Red Bull is that they've got a lower centre of gravity of those parts mounted low in the chassis, whereas Ferrari have got them higher up. But from a packaging point of view, it makes the Ferrari solution more likely to be reliable. It's much easier to work on. For Red Bull, it's a much bigger job to make any suspension changes on their car or setup changes at the front end. Red Bull staunchly believe that that's a big aerodynamic advantage by having that layout. Ferrari, clearly, their engineers and wind tunnel disagrees with that. But all of those layouts of those suspension parts, it's nothing to do with getting the car to go around the corner best, and there's no suspension layout that you're seeing visibly that's going to make you work better around a corner. The reason they're doing this is purely aerodynamic. But as the cars go through the corner, you start to see some more fundamental concept differences. Look at the shape of the side pod on the Ferrari SF-23. You can see it's almost like a wall going upwards with those big scoops out of the centre, which you can't really see from the side, but it's quite clear to see here. Whereas the Red Bull side pod is an entirely different concept with that big swoop down towards the rear above the O of Oracle. Whereas look at the R of Ray-Ban on the Ferrari side pod, and it's much, much higher. So Ferrari are taking a completely different approach to side pod design. And as the footage moves forward ever so slightly, you'll notice at the rear, it's the opposite to the front. So while Ferrari had push rod front suspension, it's got pull rod rear, Red Bull have done the exact opposite. So it is opposites day. But the big undercut on the side pod of the Red Bull now becomes really apparent in this footage, whereas look at the Ferrari, not really an undercut at all from this angle. You can really see that difference so clearly. And the difference in the cooling louvres as well. Ferrari, huge cooling louvres. That Ferrari V6 and the power unit clearly requiring quite a bit of cooling. Red Bull and the Honda power unit, a little bit less. Or are they cooling it in a slightly different way? It's hard to see with the bodywork on the cars. Then as we get round to the rear of the cars, the overall shape of the diffusers of Formula 1 cars are pretty restricted by the regulation, which is why it's not back in the days where we really want to look at the diffusers. But you can see those beam wings above around the exhaust pipe. Very different concept again. Red Bull's beam wings are quite aggressive, quite abrupt, sticking very thick and sort of sticking upwards, whereas Ferrari are much thinner, much more delicate beam wings. So again, a very different concept. And you can just see on the right-hand side of the screen a small section of the floor. The Ferrari floor, much flatter, much more simple in some areas, and the Red Bull much more intricate. And that's something I think you might see develop on both of those cars, but that is a very expensive area to develop in terms of wind tunnel and CFD time, and Ferrari have got a bit more, well, a lot more of that than Red Bull do.
I think after 19 hours of live broadcasting, that's the single best thing we've had on pre-season testing TV chat. You can mic drop and leave the studio now, Sam. That was sensational, mate. Loved that. Really enjoyed that. Thank you, buddy. That was really
Stay there.
good.
We'll do it with another two cars in a minute.